in 1947, an artist by the name of Martel Langsdorff was commissioned to design a clock for the cover of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. Her artwork was this mid-century rendition of a clock that was set to read 7 minutes before midnight. Midnight, according to this, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, midnight was representing the end of the known world as we know it. And it had become known to this day, that clock had become known to this day as the Doomsday Clock. Now in 1947, just 2 years after the United States had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, atomic scientists were greatly concerned because they believed that the proliferation of nuclear war created the possibility of humanity completely destroying itself through a self-inflicted global catastrophe. Annually, since that time, the doomsday clock is adjusted either forward or backward in order to reflect the concern that they have. It has been as far away from midnight as 17 minutes in 1991 when the Strategic Arms Reduction Act Treaty was signed by United States President George H.W. Bush and Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. And as the years have progressed, other factors have been added to the global safety. Climate change, disruptive technologies like bioweapons and even AI, biological threats like various diseases and epidemics, political instability, zombie apocalypse. Well, maybe not the zombie apocalypse. Today, the doomsday clock sets at 89 seconds to midnight. Now, I'm not telling you all that to freak you out on a Sunday morning. I tell you this as a reminder, first of all, that as human beings created in the image of God, we have a divine responsibility to be stewards of the earth that God's created and placed us here to manage. And we could all say we've not done a real good job at that. But as followers of Jesus, we ought to be at the forefront of caring for the home that God's placed us in. Now, I also thought about the doomsday clock as I read my Bible and think about it, and I get glimpses of God's grand plan. And I believe that God, as the Creator, reserves for Himself the right of deciding when and how this earth will end and the new heaven and the new earth will be created. In other words, while I care deeply about my part to care about the earth, I don't lose any sleep worrying about where the doomsday clock is set. I think if we've learned anything as we come to the end of our time with an epilogue next week, end of our time in Daniel, we've learned that God is in control even when we think life is chaotic. And we live and engage in a culture every day, a culture that has so many different views of everything. And I think it's important as followers of Jesus to live in the culture where we are with humility and calmness and trust in God. And it is in that that we can make a difference in the lives of others. When we are concerned citizens who care about the world that we live in, who care about peace on earth, who care about the vulnerable, as we read in Psalm 82, we reflect the heart of God. And we do that best as we keep, for the last time, our theme of Daniel forefront in our minds. No matter the prevailing circumstances in my world, God is always in control. And one day, He will make all things new. Daniel chapters 10 through 12 comprise a complete unit. If you read these chapters, if you read them over the past week, you saw that there wasn't a break in the flow of the narrative. It just goes right into the other. You could erase the chapter headings and just have one long section. It's a flowing narrative. In chapter 10, we have a vision. In chapter 11, we have a summary of roughly 300 years of world history and how Israel would be impacted. There's a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to do it today in a little bit of a unique fashion. We're going to begin this morning, and I'm going to show you what I observed as hope that is bound up in this section. And then I'm going to summarize for you the historical section of chapter 11, focusing on those sections that apply most to Israel. And we're going to see God's hand in that. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with this reminder that we are to rest in God's plan and focus what's before us in the present. So the scene opens in Daniel chapter 10, and Daniel says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. Understanding the message came to him in a vision. Verse 2, at that time I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine, touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. Now, we don't know if he was in a state of mourning or if he went into mourning after seeing the vision. I kind of take it that he was in mourning. And here's why I would say that. And first of all, he was in mourning, and he took the position of mourning. He didn't eat everything. He didn't fast. It wasn't a complete fast. It was a partial fast, subsisting on a very simple diet. He didn't use lotions for 3 weeks. He didn't take a bath. Now, I can think of other ways to being assigned a position of solitude, but this was what he chose, and that's what the text reads. You see, Cyrus was on the throne, and Cyrus had a different policy than anyone before him. Cyrus thought, maybe the best way to do things is to let people go back to their homes. And go back to their homes under the authority of the empire, but let them go back to their homes. Let them worship freely. They're going to be better subjects to the empire if they're at home and worshiping freely than if we're taking them away from home and putting them in strange places. And so he began to issue edicts, one of them to Israel, that they could go back. Now, don't let it escape you that Cyrus, unbeknownst to himself, was doing God's bidding. God had promised that the people would go back to the land. For Israel, this was an okay but not great reality. It was not a complete fulfillment. Yes, some returned to the land, beginning in Ezra chapter 1. Some went back to the land. Yes, the city was being rebuilt. Yes, the temple was being rebuilt, but if you read the prophet Haggai, people were weeping who were old enough to remember the old temple before it was torn down and realized this is just not the same. So, yeah, and so those things were happening, but there was no descendant of David on the throne. There was, the temple was there, but they weren't really prospering. They weren't back in the land like they were hoping to be. I mean, when we read this, Daniel didn't go back. He's still in Babylon and still being called by his name Belteshazzar, still serving the king. So it's not a complete fulfillment. And I think as Daniel reflects on all this, he's mourning. And he has a vision one day along the banks of the Tigris River. That picks it up in verse 4. On the 24th day of the first month, I was standing on the bank of the great river Tigris. I looked up before me, and there before me was a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. His voice sounded like the sound of a multitude. Just imagine this. This is something he's never seen before. When it speaks, it's loud, and it's like a large choir. I mean, the reverb had to be amazing. And he's seen this. He's seen this amazing vision. It's a frightening vision. And even though he's the only one that sees it, he says the men around him were such terrified. Even though they didn't see it, something about that terrified them. They turned and ran. It could simply be the wind shifted and they were downwind of Daniel, who hadn't bathed in 3 weeks, and they said, we are getting out of here. Daniel literally faints. He said, end of verse 8, I had no strength left, my face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking. As I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. Daniel faints. Notice, and it's very important to note this is not Daniel falling down in worship. Anywhere in Scripture, when an angel appears and somebody falls down to worship, the angel picks them up and says, don't worship me. Angels will not accept human worship because they, like us, worship the only living God. Verse 10, a hand touches him, sets him trembling on his hands and knees. So he's flat on his face. Now he gets up on his hands and knees. I don't know if I fainted once. It's been a long time ago. But I know that my dear wife was the one that had to kind of pick my sorry carcass up and get me going. It was a flu bug and all. But I remember just being shaky. And so there is, he's trembling, he's shaky. And he encourages him. He gets him to his feet. And he does several things that I think are very important. And what they're going to do is they're going to help us have some hope. So he picks him up. And look what he says to him in verse 11. Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, and consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you, and stand up, for I've been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. So first of all, he tells Daniel, you're highly esteemed. Daniel, you're valuable. You are valuable to me. You're valuable to God. I have some important things to share with you. And then in verses 12 and 18, then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Verse 18, again, the one who looked like a man touched me, gave me strength. Verse 19, do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed. He said, peace, be strong, now be strong. He said, Daniel, I don't want you to be afraid. And then he tells him, he says something like this. He says, then he continued, he said, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. And now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Daniel, I got involved in a cosmic spiritual conflict between good and evil. And so it was, this was a tough thing. He wanted him to know there's another battle being waged in our lives that we can't always see. And I find my first three sections of hope in these statements, and then I'll give you a fourth later. And the first one is this: have hope. God really hears and responds to our prayers. I know it's kind of a repeat from last week, but I think it's a good thing to remember. As I was thinking about this week, I remembered one of my favorite word pictures from the book of Revelation. Revelation 5:8 says that the 24 elders held 24 golden bowls of incense, and in those bowls of incense were the prayers of the saints. You think about that. These precious bowls of incense, they're the prayers of the saints. God values your prayers. He values your communication. He really hears and listens and responds to your prayers. We need to have hope in troubled times that God still hears. But then twice Daniel's told not to fear, and repeatedly throughout Scripture, in my study, I've found that so often the do not fear passages come with either a message of comfort or a reminder of God's presence. And I would just say this: have hope. God's presence is greater than our fear. Whatever you and I are afraid of, God's presence is greater. I remember several times when kids were much younger, we had to go into, maybe had to go down in the basement. You remember when you were young, basements were scary. When you got to be about a teenager, basements were a refuge. But, and you go down in that basement. And I know going down with my kids into that, or I remember we went through Merrimack Caverns once, or the Mark Twain Cave back in Hannibal, Missouri. And I remember every now and then one of the kids would just reach a hold and grab my hand. It was like Dad's presence is greater than my fear. Well, we need to grab a hold of God's hand. God's presence is greater than our fear. Daniel, you're afraid, you're trembling. Peace, be strong. God is here. And along with that cosmic battle, now I am not going to get into who the prince of the Persian kingdom was and what all of that is. And there's, sometimes we have to take the Bible at face value and not try to figure everything out if God hasn't told us to figure everything out. All we do know is there is a cosmic battle being waged. Paul will tell us in Ephesians 6, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. There is a cosmic battle being waged between good and evil. And for whatever reason, God allows it to happen. But we find that we can have hope because God is still in control in the cosmic battle between good and evil. Notice that this angel was resisted for 21 days, but finally Michael, the archangel, came and he kind of gave him some relief. He spelled him because he was on a mission to go to Daniel. 21 days, 3 weeks. Daniel mourned for how long? 3 weeks. During the time he was mourning and fasting and praying, there was a cosmic battle being waged that delayed the answer until he was ready to receive it. And that brings us to chapter 11. I got to go back just a moment. In chapter 8, Daniel was given this vague sketch of the future that left him, as we recall, exhausted and confused. And I think possibly his reflection on that, trying to still figure that out, as well as the limited freedom granted to those who had returned to the land, may have all been part of his mourning. In chapter 11, Daniel is giving a much more comprehensive view of what's to come, and it's not a stretch now to go back and see some of the fulfillment that took place. Now, what Daniel is given in chapter 11 and what we're given in chapter 11 are these broad brushstrokes of history. And this is not a detailed account. It's a summary. It's that the term is called telescoping. I've used it before, where you're standing on a mountain, you have a telescope, and you can see other mountain ranges, and you can see them, but you can't see in the valleys. And the prophets often saw forefront of history from that mountaintop, and so they saw the highlights. And so Daniel gets these broad brushstrokes, and as a result, there are some holes in the account. And there are some that say, well, the reason there are some historic holes in the account is because this was written later in the 2nd century, and the scribe was reflecting back, and he missed some things. But when you look at it that way, I think sometimes you run the danger of taking God out of the equation. I'm one who takes that God, through the angel, gives Daniel as much as he can understand and stretches him a little bit, but it's also as much as he needs to be satisfied and to be assured that God is moving through the course of human history and his purposes are going to come about. Let me give you the first case in point. Well, let's pick it up in verse 2 of chapter 11. The angel says, "Now then, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he's gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will arise who will rule with great power and do as he pleases." One more sentence. "After he has arisen, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven." We'll stop right there. Cyrus was the king when Daniel was writing this or hearing this. The last king of Persia was Darius III, from Cyrus to Darius, there are 13 kings. This king says there's going to be 4 kings, and then one's going to rise who's richer than the others. Then a mighty king will come. And by the way, he's going to stir everyone up against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will come, and eventually his kingdom will be divided into 4 sections. We know the mighty king to be Alexander the Great. So wait a minute, what happened to the other 9 kings? The 4th king after Cyrus was a king by the name of Xerxes. His Hebrew name is Ahasuerus. He's the king of Queen Esther fame. He was the one who first began to stir the Persians against Greece and led an invasion of Greece in 480 BC, was turned away. I believe between verses 2 and 3 of chapter 11, there are 176 years that take place. So between 2 and 3, it's 176 years. And so it was Xerxes who started the conflict, and it continued kingdom after kingdom until Alexander said, no more conflict, I'm taking over. Verse 3 introduces us to Alexander the Great. In 13 years, as we've talked about, he led the armies of Greece to take over more of the known world than anyone else had before him. And he was the one who, and so here he was, and by the time he got to Babylon at 32, 33 years old, he dies. His kingdom was divided up into 4 sections, and not really peaceably. And so these 4 regions, and there were his generals that took on the role. And there are 2 dynasties that are at play in chapter 11. And if you read chapter 11, there's the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south, and they're going at each other, and then they're saying, let's have peace. Here, you can marry my daughter. Yeah, I don't like her. I'm going to set her aside. I'm coming after you again. And it's like a soap opera. The vision of these 2 dynasties centers around what's called the beautiful land in verse 16. And the beautiful land, as we know, is a name for the land of Israel. And the kings of the north were based beginning in Babylon. They were called the Seleucids from the first general, Seleucus. The kings of the south are based mainly in Egypt. They're called the Ptolemies with a silent P at the beginning, based on the general Ptolemy, who was the first ruler. And they go back and forth vying for power over quite a few years, probably about 250 years. A key section, I think, and a key statement for Daniel begins in chapter 11, verse 28. Let me read that. The king of the north will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action against it and return to his own country. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different than it was before. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the holy covenant. He will return and show favor to those who forsake the holy covenant. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many things, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what is determined must take place. I am convinced that what's being described here is what we saw in chapter 8, and that is, as historical scholars across the board identify this particular person as one of the Seleucid kings, Antiochus IV. And one may wonder, okay, why the repeat here? And I believe it's due to the fact that Daniel is given much more detail so that he and other readers like us can get a better vision of what happened in chapter 8. You see, sometimes God reveals his plans incrementally, and he allows us to have time to process them. And we see the things that we saw before. He will desecrate the temple. He will come back from losing a campaign, from being defeated. He will come back and he's angry, and so he takes it out on the people of Israel. And he will desecrate the temple, which Antiochus Epiphanes did by setting up a statue of Zeus and then offering the sacrifice of a pig upon the altar. And it says he will divide the people. There were some, as we said a couple weeks ago, said, let's just go along to get along. Let's be Greek, And others said, no, we are going to stay true to the text, true to the scriptures. There was violent persecution under him. Some people died for their faith. But notice, verse 35, the time of the end will come at its appointed time. Antiochus looked powerful. Antiochus looked unbeatable. Antiochus deified himself. Antiochus, there was resistance against him. We talked about that. The Maccabees that took charge and that instituted some guerrilla warfare. But I want you to look at something. Look at verse 45 of chapter 11. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. Antiochus, you would think this was a guy that he went out strong. No. He literally just simply died in his tent one night of a disease. Nobody was there to help him. He was done. And that really gives me my fourth hope statement this morning. Have hope. God is still in control in spite of the present instability of our world. And that could be of any age. What we see here in chapter 11 is nothing but instability as these nations just go back and forth. And this one king who's got so many armies turns his wrath on Israel, says things about God that nobody's ever even thought to say about, deifies himself and all. And you look at all that and say, God, where are you? And he says, I am right here. And believe it or not, as unstable as it looks, it's right where I want it to be. And you say, but why the suffering? I can't answer that question. I can't answer why God allows persecution, but I can tell you this, throughout history, when there has been persecution of Christians, the church has grown and strengthened. And I'm not out here thinking, okay, I'm going to go out and create a situation where I get persecuted. I don't think God calls me to do that. Well, what happens is we flow right into chapter 12. Chapter 12 outlines the unique interplay between the cosmic battle and earthly conflict. It says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. A time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. And there's this beginning thought of resurrection. It's one of the first ideas of resurrection that we find in the scriptures. In fact, we go on. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting conflict. There's this thought of there's going to come a time where even those who are dead were going to somehow be resurrected, some for life, some for shame. And he says, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. So Daniel's told, okay, Michael's going to be delivering people at the right time. There's going to be still conflict. There's hope in the end. And so Daniel's like, okay, I know what to do, but he says he looks and he saw two others. They're on the opposite side of the river. He's at the river Tigris, one over there, one over here. And one of them says to the man clothed in linen, who's the big guy that has the voice that sounds like this choir, how long before these astonishing things are fulfilled? And I think we have some of the most confusing uses of numbers in Scripture. The man clothed in linen above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward the heaven. So he lifts his hands, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever. So he's now swearing by God himself. It will be for time, times, and half a time, when the power of the holy people is finally broken and all these things will be completed. I heard, but I did not understand. So I asked, my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Okay, so we have time, times, and half a time. We've seen that before. We have 1,290 days, which we saw before and said, okay, about pretty much the time from Antiochus slaughtering the pig to the Maccabees taking over the temple and renewing it. And then we have 1,335 days, which we haven't seen before. And so, yes, we can apply some of this to how Antiochus worked, his desecration of the temple, the ultimate victory of the Maccabees. But even Daniel is confused. He's not given a clear answer. And I think when we get to this point, I hearken back to what I quoted a few weeks ago. And let me repeat it here. The highly symbolic numbers in Daniel are not for date setting, but for comfort. They remind us that God knows what he's doing and has set a limit on how long the present evil world will oppress us. Daniel, I've got this. So what do we do with this? How do we respond? What does God want from us right here in 2025? I think the two instructions that Daniel is given are a clue. First, he's told, roll up the scroll and seal the words. It's a statement that this writing isn't to be altered in any way. It's a statement that those who follow are to wait patiently for God to fully reveal his plan. There's that phrase there that we read, many are going to go here and there to increase knowledge. That is not a positive description. That's a description of people just running all over to try to figure everything out, to try to figure out their life. And I'm going to tell you, we have that right here in 2025. Between Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and Twitch and whatever other, you can find anything to tell you anything you want from any source. And maybe it's important that we say, wait, I'm going to come back to the source. And I know people will say, well, how do you know the Bible was just written by a bunch of white guys? You know, it was written by the people God chose to write it. And it was written to speak not only to their time, but to apply to us. And we are to be a people who in wisdom wait on the Lord. That means to depend on the Lord, and so doing find wisdom to him. And let me remind you that waiting on the Lord in Scripture doesn't mean to do nothing. It means to do what God set before you in the moment. We read Psalm 82, Asaph speaking truth to power. We ought to be the people who hold power accountable for taking care of the poor and the downtrodden. We ought to speak out when people are oppressed. We ought to be the ones to do that. Either speak out with letters, speak out with your voice, speak out with your vote. We should not support oppression. That's what we can do. But notice also twice in verses 9 and 13, Daniel is told, go your way. I like how the Message renders that phrase. Daniel, go about your business without fretting or worrying. Relax. You and I don't have to worry about the future and the demise of the world. We don't have to prepare for anything, even a zombie apocalypse. We don't have to try to read the signs and determine, okay, is Jesus coming now? Love my mother dearly, my late mom. I'll never forget the morning I walked into our kitchen and my mom was there crying tears of joy. Now, I was probably somewhere between 10 and 13 years old. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? Oh, I'm so happy. The return of the Lord is closer than it's ever been. How do you know? Because they were going to build a Holiday Inn on the top of the Mount of Olives. And when they did the geological survey, they realized that there is a fissure at the top of the Mount of Olives. It's beginning to crack, and it's going to open, and Jesus will come down. 53 years later, and the Mount of Olives is still there. Now, now my mom believed that with all her heart, and that was the knowledge she had at the time. But I don't have to worry. I don't have to try to figure that out. You see, like Daniel, you and I live in the hope of a promised return of a Messiah at a time of choosing, but that the Father and the Son and the Spirit have already determined. Go about our daily business. Go about our daily business with hope and confidence, and in so doing, we can be like those people described in 12:3, but also described by the Apostle Paul later on in Philippians. Shine like the brightness of the heavens and lead many to righteousness. My job is to reflect Jesus to the culture in which I live so that they can see my good works and glorify my Father, Sermon on the Mount, and that's my job. And it's God's job to worry about whatever's coming down the pike. It's 89 seconds to midnight. And my prayer is that you don't worry about any human prediction. My prayer is that while you and I should be the best managers of the world around us, doing our part in small ways, we ought to also be the most confident people in the middle of chaos and confusion, political posturing, wars and rumors of wars. Like the writer to the Hebrews says, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. There is so much that we don't understand, so much that we need to just hold up to God in humility as we wait on His plan to unfold. And remember, as we have stressed week in and week out and week in and week out, no matter the prevailing circumstances in my world, God is always in control. And one day He'll make all things new. Each day is a day for us to have confidence in God and to trust Him when life around us seems to be falling apart. He is still God. He is still in control. His plan is still working to perfection the way He wants it to work, and we can trust Him no matter what. We don't need to know the ins and the outs. We don't need to know all the signs. We simply need to know the one who says, I love you. I forgive you. I died for you. I rose again. Follow me. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will come again. I will make all things new. Father, thank you for your word this morning. Thank you that just like us, you left Daniel wondering and yet left him in confidence, knowing that you are there. I just ask, Lord, this morning that you would help us. Help us to have confidence in you and in who you are and in your character and in the fact that you've proven yourself to us again and again. And in so doing, Lord, may we shine in the lives of others and be those who point them to Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen.